The Department of Justice is calling China out for bribing a U.S. government employee. But China's attempt to steal secrets failed when the employee turned out to be a double agent. NTD's Iris Tao brings us more.
The Justice Department and the FBI today announced charges for 3 major cases, calling out the Chinese regime for obstructing justice and undermining freedoms here in the U.S. Let's hear what FBI Director Christopher Wray has to say at a press conference today.
In all 3 of these cases, and frankly in thousands of others, we've found the Chinese government threatening established democratic norms and the rule of law as they work to undermine U.S. economic security and fundamental human rights, including those of Americans.
According to the Justice Department, in one of the cases, 2 intelligence officers working for the Chinese Communist Party approached a U.S. government employee. The goal was to obtain secret information about charges against Huawei, a major Chinese telecommunications company. The CCP agents paid bribes to the employee and were given documents they thought had what they wanted. But it turned out
the insider flipped the script on the defendants by working not for them, but for Team America.
And of course, the documents were fake. Here's Attorney General Merrick Garland talking about it.
The government of China sought to interfere with the rights and freedoms of individuals in the United States and to undermine our judicial system that protects those rights. They did not succeed.
And in another case, several CCP intelligence officers were charged with trying to steal sensitive technologies in the U.S. using the cover of an academic institute. They're also accused of interfering with protests here that Garland said would have been embarrassing to the Chinese government. And in the third case, a group of 7 harassed and threatened a naturalized U.S. citizen for years.
The defendants threatened the victim, saying that, quote, coming back and turning herself in is the only way out, and said it would be, quote, endless misery for the defendant and son to defend themselves.
The White House today didn't comment on the cases, other than saying that the DOJ has a standard process for notifications of law enforcement actions. The press secretary, however, mentioned that the U.S. is willing to cooperate with China in areas such as climate change, adding that it's important to keep the conversations between the 2 countries going. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Iris Tao, NTD News.
American school children are doing worse in math and reading. A new release by the nation's report card confirms the trend. Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona reacts.
This is not a wake-up call for us to double down our efforts and improve education. Even before before the pandemic, then I don't know what will. We really need to make sure we're utilizing the ARP dollars to help our students in reading and math.
The assessment targeted 4th and 8th graders between January and March this year. The last assessment was in 2019 before the COVID-19 pandemic. In math, students had the largest decline since the assessment began in 1990. And in reading, 4th and 8th graders' scores also declined compared to 2019. No state showed improvements in math and reading scores. Reading scores declined in around 30 states, and math scores declined in over 40 states and jurisdictions. And prior to the pandemic, many Americans were already sounding the alarm when it came to America's illiteracy rate. The new report we just mentioned confirms it's only gotten worse. Here to assess, we're happy to have Director of the Center for Education at the Heritage Foundation, Lindsay Burke. Lindsay Burke, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Lindsay, when it comes to the discussion revolving around children and education, a lot has been talked about critical race theory, SEL, social emotional learning. However, the meat and potatoes, reading, writing, and arithmetic has been sidelined to a certain degree. A report by the National Assessment of Educational Progress shows that math and reading scores have plummeted from pre-pandemic levels. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I mean, this is just a disaster. I don't think that there's another way to state it. I mean, these are predictable yet really shocking outcomes nonetheless. This is what is known as the nation's report card. As you said, it's the National Assessment of Educational Progress. And if we look at math scores, I mean, these are some of the biggest declines that we have seen in 3 decades. 8th graders in particular saw massive declines in their mathematics proficiency. And so we're now at the point where only 26% of 8th graders can do math on grade level. I mean, should really shock us when we see these declines. That was a big dip from 2019, just a few years ago. And then in reading, both in 4th and 8th grade reading, we saw scores dip significantly. And so, what this really shows us is that a combination of factors, but certainly teachers union induced school closures have played a big part in this. But at the same time, it is a lot of policies in schools supported by these special interest groups, schools being focused on things like radical gender ideology and critical race theory at a time when we're seeing a real crisis in academic outcomes. And so this really does just, I think, punctuate how bad things are in schools across the country as we sort of exit this COVID era.
Lindsay, you mentioned that there's a combination of things that are contributing to this. There were some would call an education crisis in our country before the pandemic. What do you think led to this, and what is the solution?
Well, I think ultimately what has led to this has been that we have a system where parents have historically had very little voice in what their children are taught in schools, where their children attend schools, and whether or not they have an exit option. We have a K-12 system in America that is government assigned, it is publicly funded, and it is compulsory. And that is really, I think, the perfect storm of policies that really prevent family agency in their children's education. And so, this is a problem that was exacerbated clearly by COVID policies, right? Teachers unions really pushing to keep schools closed. I think we can set these poor outcomes directly at their feet. But the structure of education in America is really what has prevented academic outcomes from being where we would hope they would be. And so if we want to change that dynamic moving forward, we have to move toward policies where we fund children directly rather than funding physical school buildings and assigning kids to those schools. Because that is a structure that really disempowers particularly low-income families, but really disserves all families in America. And we're seeing right now that conversation change in a big way. States like Arizona have moved toward completely universal school choice. No caveats. Every single family in Arizona will now have the ability to select into a school that is the right fit for their child, that aligns with their values, and provides them the education that they're looking for. That is the path forward. And until we move in that direction, we're not going to see these outcomes improve significantly.
Now, I just want to circle back to SEL, or social emotional learning. Has this sort of pushed out the merit-based system to a certain degree? And is it fair to say until this gets resolved, the situation could continue to decline?
Yeah, I think that's right. And SEL is just such an amorphous catchphrase that it tends to become whatever people want it to become. And that has really enabled a lot of these ideologies to take root in schools, whether we're talking about critical race theory or radical gender ideology. Schools are just not focused on the meat and potatoes issues that families really rely on them for. And we see that in these new NAEP results that are out today. I mean, look at some of the state outcomes that we saw this morning when everybody woke up and looked at these results. If you look at Delaware, 4th graders in Delaware lost 14 points. That's a year and a half worth of learning in math. I mean, Maryland, New Mexico, New York, Virginia, across the board, Washington, D.C. lost a year's worth of learning in math. And reading outcomes were very bad in states like Delaware and West Virginia. I mean, they lost 12 points in reading achievement. Parents are highly concerned about these academic drops, but they're equally concerned about the culture of schools across the country. And for so many families, schools are not reflecting their values or their hopes or aspirations for their children, which I do think is why we're seeing such a welcome shift towards school choice in places like Arizona, Florida, West Virginia, and elsewhere.
Lindsay Burke, really appreciate your insights.
Thank you for having me.
2.4 million illegal migrants arrested this fiscal year, the highest number ever recorded. That's in addition to the estimated 900,000 gotaways. A border town in Arizona is feeling the impact of this directly, with border smuggling at its highest levels. NTD's Melina Wisecup has the latest.
I'm here at Coronado National Forest in Sierra Vista, Arizona. We're about 8 to 10 miles away from the U.S.-Mexico border, making this not an ordinary forest. We're told by local law enforcement that illegal crossers wishing to evade Border Patrol oftentimes use areas like this to camouflage themselves as they inch closer and closer into the inner cities. Right after this sign here welcomes visitors to the forest, another sign follows, a sign of caution, warning travelers that they may encounter illegal activities here, such as human smuggling. But the danger doesn't stop here.
There was a 16-year-old kid who was picking up undocumented immigrants. He went up to an intersection which was over 20 miles away, again driving at a high rate of speed. He ignored the traffic control devices, ran right through it and smashed into this lady who was 65 years old, killing her instantly.
Cartels are using social media apps like TikTok, Snapchat, and Facebook to recruit U.S. citizens, offering tens of thousands of dollars to anyone who can drive down to the border and help them to smuggle. Illegal crossers hide out and wait for someone the cartel hired to pick them up and rush them as far away from the border as possible.
Yesterday I was going home. Checked on the radio to come out of my office to go home. 2 pursuits. 100 miles an hour through my communities. 1,016 people have been booked in my jail for border-related crimes. That's unheard of here. It's unheard of. I've always seen smuggling. But to the level we're seeing now, to the aggression with the pursuits, the fight, whatever they can do to get away from us. Everybody comes through my county is camouflaged. This is part of the Tucson sector, which leads the nation in Gotaways, Tucson area, and that's what we deal with every day.
Under a new state law, the Sheriff's Department has arrested 43 people for smuggling and more than 1,000 people for border-related crimes.
One of them is 18. He was 18 years old. He is going to college. He was making some money, extra money. Now he's sitting in our jail on a Class 2 felony, and he's going to be there for a while. You have agreed. You have a situation where you figure if you have access to a vehicle, and even the cartels will provide you with a vehicle sometimes. They'll tell you to go into this parking lot, and the key will be in the gas tank, and just take this car and go.
In the Tucson sector alone, the Border Patrol has seized over 5,000 pounds of fentanyl and 17,000 pounds of methamphetamine in 2022. These have become even harder for Border Patrol to detect after the border wall construction was halted, along with the technology that went with it. In addition, the Biden administration has essentially shut down the traffic control checkpoints, moving Border Patrol agents to the processing facility 100 miles away from the southwest border.
We are doing something the federal government should be sharing with us. But if I don't do it, it opens up the floodgates even worse. So yes, we have to provide hope to our citizens. I took an oath, I was elected to do that, and I'm not going to change my ways because Washington, D.C. chose not to.
And what exactly should Washington, D.C. do to help you all?
Well, first thing is they need to recognize and admit they have a problem. They need to engage. And last but not least, we need to unite and work together on this. We might not always agree, but at the end of the day, at least we're sharing the same message.
Reporting in Sierra Vista, Arizona, Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
Economists are warning that the U.S. has entered a recession or will be in one before the end of 2023. That's according to the latest poll from the National Association for Business Economics. About 2/3 of the association's economists surveyed said that the recession is either here or imminent within the next year. The respondents said the U.S. economy is slowing and risks are growing. The biggest concerns are interest rates and historically high inflation. Layoffs are also on the horizon. The Federal Reserve has said that a weaker labor market could bring down inflation. And the International Monetary Fund, IMF, sees a dim economic outlook for next year as well. The World Bank has signaled the danger of a global recession as a consequence of central banks fighting high inflation. Some key Republicans have speculated that economic experts have resisted calling the current economic downturn a recession due to the upcoming midterm elections.